Hello, friend. Long time no see. I've been thinking about free will for a long time, probably over 10 years at least. And I've been thinking about it from a scientific perspective, as I've also been thinking about these papers that I've published along with my former boss and mentor, Dr. Sylvester. And while publishing these papers, I went back and forth on my ideas of free will. Is it completely deterministic, or do you have wiggle room for some actual choices to be done? And while being totally deterministic might make you feel better about some of your mistakes in the past, it also doesn't leave any room to make them better in the future. So maybe in a sense, both sides are kind of unsettling. But I think where the answer lies really will free the mind of everything that we might worry about when it comes to this question. So let me talk to you about how I got to this answer by not only making these YouTube videos that have led up to this, but also by publishing papers. I started out with ideas in 2022, and I came out with a paper, Role of Galectins in Metastatic Breast Cancer. And that eventually led to a paper that just recently got published called Gamma-tocotrienol Inhibition of Galectin-3 Expression, Distribution, and Oligomerization in Highly Metastatic Breast Cancer Cells. And while on my way to going from this paper to this paper, which took a while, I also published these two papers, which touched on mechanisms that free will could have to do with. So in this paper, Chaos to Coherence, A Path to Molecular Organization, I talked about quantum mechanisms, but I really scientifically talked about it, so you have to reduce it to specific aromatic residues and what they have to do with organizing different components in the cell. So that's why it's called A Path to Molecular Organization. But I only briefly highlighted on how the whole system works as a complex adaptive system. And then in this paper, liquid-liquid phase separation as a driver of abiogenesis and evolution, I explained how this mechanism, this quantum mechanism that also can organize macromolecular parts into droplets and be dynamically modulated by something as simple as light or electrical potential from ions or chemical signaling. I explained how that could have happened from the beginning of life on Earth and throughout evolution, and the evolution of all the different animals, and each animal has different compartments and cells within it, and I explained all that. So how could this all be working? Well, it could all be working like a non-computational algorithm, which sounds like a contradiction at first, but it's really about processes that behave like algorithms, a step-by-step evolution, yet can't be fully predicted or simulated by any finite computation. An example of that is a dynamical system. And I always talk about in my YouTube videos how you can use a dynamic dodecahedron fractal to understand all of existence, how all of existence emerges and evolves. And that is a dynamical framework which gives wiggle room for free will and choices. But let's explain how that geometrical framework allows that to happen. So, what if reality is running an algorithm, but one that can't be fully computed? What if the evolution of life and even your own thoughts depends on answering a question that no machine can ever definitely solve? In mathematics, there are problems that look simple, but hide a deeper truth. About 100 years ago, Kurt Gödel showed something unsettling in his incompleteness theorem. Any sufficiently powerful system of logic contains truths that cannot be proven within that system. Then Alan Turing proved that some questions, like whether a program will halt, can never be answered by any general algorithm. This is known as the halting problem. Years later, Turing published The Chemical Basis of Morphogenesis, giving model for morphology. And morphology is basically the structure of life. And he used the mathematics from Kurt Gödel and the mathematics he developed. He used ideas from all those mathematics to come up with how life can form all the patterns that we're familiar with in living organisms. Later on, Roger Penrose explored how these limits might show up in the physical world through geometry itself, through things like Penrose tiling, which I'll talk about in future slides. So you can also read this paper called Did Turing Stand on Gödel's Shoulders if you want more about the mathematics behind this. And I just made a cool image showing that patterns or geometry can emerge in 3 dimensions and combine in a branching fractal lattice pattern. But this is just to get the idea of what it may look like, but not really something that's like scientifically accurate. So let's get more into the geometry. Imagine a system that evolves step by step. At each moment, it must decide how to grow next. But the rule it follows depends on answering a global question about itself, a question equivalent to the halting problem. So the system is deterministic, rule-based, locally computable, but globally incomputable. So a good way to think about this in 3 dimensions, as I said before, is a dodecahedron fractal that's dynamically changing and can create emergent geometry that is novel. Another way to think about it in 2 dimensions, which Roger Penrose came up with, is Penrose tiling. And you can see that these are rhombic tiling that you can think about keep on extending. And the cool thing about these is there's no algorithm that can predict what's going to happen next, and if these tilings are going to go on forever, which some of them do, or eventually stop, which some of them also do. And you can think about that as being choices that can be made for what comes next, where whenever you have new geometry that emerges, that could change the direction that this tiling is going. And the reason why it's non-computable is because those choices haven't been made yet. So now zoom out, look at life. Embryos develop from a single cell into complex organisms. Species evolve over millions of years into entirely new forms. These aren't random processes, they are structured, recursive, and constrained, like an algorithm unfolding in space and time. But here's the twist. The next step in evolution or development often depends on global constraints. Will this structure remain viable? Will this organism survive? Will this pattern integrate with everything else? These are not simple local computations. They are questions about the entire system. And you can see that in the different structures that need to occur to finally form a human embryo, these are answers to these questions that have been answered in the past, that have been generated in the past. So in a human embryo and in evolution, you can see that these structures are working themselves out and are answering problems in the environment so that new things can come about in the future. So life evolves like a recursive fractal. Local rules generate global structure. Global structure constrains future local rules, and the cycle repeats into the future as the system becomes wiser and more creative. As these new geometries get generated, that allows for more branches to be explored in the fractal. So this is kind of an example of what a branching fractal network could look like, and you can think of it as our conscious choice determines what area of the fractal is going to be explored. And you can think of the whole branching fractal and everything that could exist as just mathematical realism, where it anything in mathematics that's possible would would account for all of this space, but then our conscious choices dictate what actually gets explored. And somewhere in this loop, something new happens. Ideas emerge, not just a recombination of the past, but genuinely novel patterns that have never existed before. Eureka! If the system were fully computable, every future idea would already be implicit in the past. But if its evolution depends on undecidable questions, then the future is not fully determined in any computable sense. Inside your brain, something remarkable is happening. Cells aren't just static circuits. They organize themselves through chemistry and physics. One key mechanism is called liquid-liquid phase separation. Tiny droplets form inside cells, dynamic shifting compartments that organize molecules in space and time. Each droplet follows physical rules. Each interaction is, to some extent, computable. And I have a YouTube video all on how this mechanism accounts for memory in not only humans, but also throughout all of life, since these liquid-liquid phase separated droplets are found in all cells associated with life on Earth. But now scale that up. Millions, billions of these droplets interacting through bioelectric signals, chemical gradients, mechanical forces, all coupled together into one living system. Now you no longer have a simple algorithm. You have a network of interacting processes whose global behavior cannot be reduced to any single computation. So this creates a framework for free will where you have all of these interacting droplets, millions and billions of them in your body, each droplet filled with many different biological molecules. And even though a few of those biological molecules might be computational, all of them together can actually create emergent patterns and emergent new shapes and new ideas that didn't exist before, giving a framework for free will. And these patterns have existed for a long time in philosophical thought and have even been used for paintings before, like Leonardo da Vinci. And this is how he was able to draw symmetrical patterns in all of his art that he's created. This is where something extraordinary emerges. A system that is deterministic in its rules, computational in its parts, but non-computational in its total evolution. Within that system, the space for novelty appears. So it's emergent patterns that are new. Your thoughts, your ideas, your choices, they are not just outputs of a fixed program. They are the result of a recursive fractal process, one that continuously builds itself by confronting questions it cannot fully resolve. So you can again think of this as all the mathematical possibilities. So you can think of this as the Platonic mathematical world. And then the world of consciousness is what actually determines what path is taken. And the physical world is what's actually existing in reality from those chosen paths. And I wanted to show that it's really, the further you look inward, it gets more complex. So even though one simple bi-directional branch might look simple, but if you zoom in, it was many, many different, maybe billions of different interacting droplets that had billions or trillions of different chemicals within all of them that are rearranging in new patterns to create these new ideas and new geometries that determine which path we're going to take and what the future is actually, what future is actually unfolding. So it's a lot more complex than just left or right. It's a lot of choices that are occurring, which gives a huge framework for free will. So in that gap between what can be computed and what must be created, we find something that feels a lot like free will. And I think intuitively, this is reality for all of us. Hope you enjoyed it. Have a good one.